Law Matters. Of course it does. Hi, I'm Debbie Moraes, your host and moderator. This program, as we tell you, has been created to educate, inform, and help you with law matters because the law matters. Understand the law better, and you're in a better position to understand how to help yourself, your family, and your business. We continue to provide resources that might help you determine whether or not you need to contact a lawyer. Perhaps will help you decide that you can handle some issues yourself. If you do decide that you need professional outside counsel, you'll be better prepared, and as a result, so will the counselor you choose. Of course, our goal always is to help you save time, money, and achieve the best possible results. We welcome once again and thank David Bazar, Attorney David Bazar, from the Bazar and Associates Law Firm in East Providence, who continue to provide us information and insights through all of our issues that we tackle weekly. Today we also welcome Julia Steiny, our special guest. Julia, welcome. She is the founding director of the Youth Restoration Project of Rhode Island. She's also been a freelance columnist writing about kids and schools through the lens of restorative practices and restorative justice. She's currently the project manager for the National Institute of Justice grant, a grant that is designed to study the effectiveness of restorative conferencing programs and those that are now being implemented in, I believe, 6 schools in Rhode Island. She's partnered with that grant. She's the design partner, and many of you may know her as she had served on both the Providence School Board and has served as the Providence Journal's education columnist for many years. So again, we welcome and thank you. We have, discussed justice reform, where Massachusetts even had discussed eliminating mandatory minimum sentences for non-violent drug offenses. We've discussed expunging juvenile records. Rhode Island legislators have debated the concept of justice initiatives. Those are always being debated. Some laws have changed. Our viewers may recall, you may recall, that there's a thoughtful notion that we should maybe be a little more sensible. Maybe we should reallocate some of our resources from incarceration to perhaps treatment, and then still be able to improve public safety and save money and have better outcomes. So today, in a similar vein, we'll talk about juvenile justice and, in particular, the idea of youth restoration. So Julia, we've been reading a little bit about the restoration movement as a legal system. It's been going on since the 70s. Explain this idea, and how does that concept work with kids today? What is the Youth Restoration Project about?
Well, the Youth Restoration Project, currently the big National Institute of Justice grant pays for conference facilitation. So, kid does the naughty and is assigned a conference facilitator who then assembles the group of people who were the victim, they're the offender, the family, and whoever was involved. Hopefully an advocate, somebody who's the kid's support. And then you try and get to the bottom of things, because this has been a problem, especially in schools all along, is you've got this assembly line. You need to stop the assembly line and find out what's going on so you can get to the bottom of it. Sometimes the kid's just a jerk, but really most of the time they're flagging, they don't know what the expectations are, they really don't know right from wrong because there hasn't been anybody kind of teaching them. So that's what we do. We try and get to it to change behavior. Our thing is about changing behavior.
And it's part of a legal system. It had started as part of a legal system some time ago in New Zealand, I understand?
So in New Zealand, what happened was that in 1974, they passed laws everywhere across the world, the developed world. When they were paying attention, kids are funny. We pay attention to kids on a kind of cyclical basis. So at that time, it's like, oh dear, the kids are in trouble. And so they passed laws saying that if the kid is a mess or the parents are a mess, you take the kid away from the family. And we're going to save the kid, forget the family. So more and more, there are families being ripped apart. And the Maori tribe, which is an indigenous tribe that's 30% of that country, kept going to the government and saying, this is like so not working out for us. You remand our kids into your justice system and your residential homes and everything else at this hugely higher rate than your kids. But that's not the worst of it. The worst of it is when they come back, because they're coming back. They're all coming back into the community unless they're going to be hospitalized for the rest of their lives. and we can't integrate them. They're not connected to grandma. They don't care about the culture anymore. They don't want to participate. The neighbor schmeighbor, so they become then a subculture that's like making us nuts. It took them forever, but finally the New Zealand government said, so what do you want to do? And the Maori said, our ancient ways worked so much better. Bring them to tribal circle. Bring them to the elders, bring the offenders, the victims, your cops, your social workers, we don't care. Bring them all to tribal circle and let's work it out together. Figure out what happened, how come, what needs to happen, and then most importantly, what would be the repair? So we all want payback but to whom? And the answer is to the victim and to the community, the larger community that got affected. And New Zealand said, well, okay, we'll do it for your kids. But boy, the recidivism dropped like a stone into single digits, 10%. So they went, whoa, this is working. So they expanded it to the rest of the juvenile population, and now it's in the adult population. You run into legacy laws. It's not perfect. It's not perfect anywhere, but that's the basis.
So David, obviously in the United States, in Rhode Island, in Massachusetts, there's a juvenile justice philosophy and system that operates. Put a context together for us.
Well, actually, I'm interested in finding out in Rhode Island how it's integrated into our system, because the system in Rhode Island has always been at its core rehabilitation, not punishment for juveniles. So if somebody is brought into the juvenile system in Rhode Island, how do they get involved in the program that you have?
We are currently, because this is what the grant allows us to do, embedded in schools, and that's where we get our cases from. We have not been hugely successful to date with making agreements with the larger agencies. This is not uncommon, but that's when you start conferencing, you start to try and get out into social service, transportation, whatever the problem is, and that it challenges our justice system. Right. No, we need to, law and order, and we need to get in there.
So when you get a referral from the school that you're involved with, what type of cases do you usually get from them?
We have a list of low-level arrestable offenses. Believe it or not, you can be arrested for chronic absenteeism. Yeah, nobody ever does it.
Yeah.
Right. So the kinds of things in schools, fire pulls, bad bullying, fights, the kinds of stuff that really does disrupt. We don't conference putting your head on the desk and not cooperating.
And would it make sense at some point in the juvenile system through the court, they have these cases which are done through the case intake, the cases that are sort of diverted out of the court system, and they usually have the kids do something, community service or some other thing. Would those be kids that might be helped by your program?
Yes.
Right. So we got to hook you up with the Family Court Case Intake Center.
I'm in.
We can do that.
In fact, that was where I was going to go when I was asking you initially, David. So as the system is set up right now, sometimes you defend the youth, but other times as a district court judge in East Greenwich, you end up being municipal court judge. You end up being the one who's meting out some punishment. So set up for us what the context is right now. Obviously, even though you say that much of it is to be restorative, it doesn't always work that way. So where are we right now from your perspective?
There's a lot of different levels of
from truancy to murder.
Correct. And so certain things probably wouldn't be such that they would lend themselves to the court even agreeing to send them to your program. And starting in my level in municipal court and some of my jurisdictions on hold temporarily, we hope. But when a young offender comes into me, the goal is to have it be a teachable moment, not pay a fine.
To be sure.
Because if you charge a fine, usually mom or dad's going to pay the fine, and mom or dad is going to pay the insurance increase, and nobody's really learning anything from that. Well, nobody that should be learning something from it is. So we developed our own program where if it's a second offense or third offense, now we're getting a little bit on the higher end of what we would do, but we want them to learn something. So we send them to a program with a counselor through East Greenwich who knows a lot about children and things they're dealing with and meets with them. And then if it's appropriate, they might do community service, they usually do, or some other program that he thinks is appropriate. And they learn something, they come back to me, tell me what you learned, tell me you understand why doing this is dangerous, and don't make these bad decisions, and hopefully there's some good of that. And the child, the juvenile, has learned something, and rather than the adult paying something. Now you take it up to a different level where they're now being brought to the family court. And the family court will try to divert cases out of the judge's courtrooms for first-time offenses, for things usually with alcohol or some other offense that, again, is rehabilitative, that can be fixed through that. And those are the types of things I think that should be referred to you in some levels to help rehabilitate, restore, help the child.
Do all of the municipal courts have flexibility in how they mete out punishment or whatever the appropriate consequences? I mean, what you seem to say sounds a lot more enlightened than some of the other options that we've heard that are strictly punitive. So
every municipal court could institute its own program. The traffic tribunal actually used to have a program that was called RIDE, Reducing Youthful Dangerous Decisions. That program no longer exists, but it was very well thought of by the courts to send children to Rhode Island Hospital. They would see things that happened in the emergency room, have some classroom things. I sent a number of people there. They reported back to me. Some of it was interesting. They never wanted to tell me how bad some of it was, but some were honest and said that classroom stuff, I was in there with people who were much worse than I am, drug offenders, more serious crimes than I committed, and they weren't paying attention at all, and I'm sitting there paying attention for speeding. And I just didn't think that part of the program was great, and the funding for it dried up, so that ended anyway. That's when I created my own program.
So Julia, at the start of this, we were talking about the criminal side of that, and of course David gets involved with that on both sides of what he does. But not only are you involved with kids who are in the criminal system, perhaps you deal with, and please explain the context of this, maybe a child has other developmental disabilities or other problems that put them in a situation in schools where they're not behaving as is considered acceptable.
To be clear, what conferencing tries to do, and in fact every level of restorative accountability, so conferencing is kind of high level, is to help the kid see his or her behavior's effect on the community. So how that happens goes down differently, and when you're looking at what's going on, yes, you uncover all kinds of different problems. Like bullying makes me crazy. I would say about 10% of bullying is actual one-on-one, and the rest of it is you start to unpeel onions, and you'll get into the mothers had a fight in high school and it's still going on. You'll get into there's chaos in the home. There's mother is self-medicating on street drugs, mental condition. You'll get into all kinds of stuff. So that's what family group conferencing does. It's an increasingly used technique internationally because it saves money. It's more money on the front end, but it gives you the opportunity to say, okay, can this behavior actually stop? Mm-hmm. And to do that, you're going to have to get into, so as you go into higher levels, you're going to need housing at the table, you're going to need transportation. What's wrong? Job training, what's wrong here, and how can we work? So places like Canada have really started to pull the silos down between the agencies. So
it's sort of interesting because it reminds me of a law day I did one time with a family court judge at an inner city school in Providence, and the judge at that time had been in charge of a juvenile calendar, and I think it was for drug rehabilitation. And so she was explaining how they would take the child and send them to a program and really help work the child through the drug issues or whatever issues the child had. And one of the young students raised her hand And she said to the judge, so I understand this. You take the child and you work with the child and you rehabilitate the child. Then you take the child, you put him back into the house with the same problems in the same community, in the same neighborhood, with all the same pressures and issues. Do you think you really solved anything? Yeah. And the judge thought about it and she said, you know, that's a really good point. And so what you're saying is you try to really work through down to that community and family level. Right. Which is really important.
Well, family and then the larger community you have to work with. God, one woman says, I finally got Section 8 housing, but the drug dealers upstairs scare me to death and now I have to move again. It's like, whoa, wait a second. And that one worked out. That one where the cops were helpful. Yeah. But yes, you have. So that's what restorative does, is it digs deeper and deeper into the community and tries to become sort of a support system. Because if they can solve their own problems, and that, it'll never be perfect, right? But if they can solve their own problems, it skinnies down incarceration and the use of, the need for not just imprisonment, but hospitalization and all that. You put the money on the front end.
Right.
So you've described several domains where they're creating or they're identifying risk factors. It's the individual level, it's at the family level, perhaps it's the peer level, and that there are so many domains there. Obviously, the justice system isn't always equipped at the criminal level to deal with that, but there is family court. Is there a place where, apart from what a CASA volunteer that can oversee some of these domains, to check where the source of the problem, if it wasn't created there, it's certainly festering or nurturing there? What can you say about that?
Those are different kinds of cases.
Sure.
With CASA, it's DCYF cases. And of course, those cases are designed to dig into the family issues because they're supposed to be the goal. As I said, with juvenile cases, the goal is rehabilitation. With DCYF cases, the goal is actually to reunite the child with the parents. Even though they've taken the child from the parents, they're supposed to be digging in and fixing those familiar issues with counseling and whatever else is needed in the home to get there. And the CASA attorney is supposed to be the advocate for the child going through that process. It's not a perfect system. Things do get stagnated and put into certain groupings where you never dig through to the problem. But that's the idea of it. So that actually, what you're doing is sort of taking what the goal of those DCYF cases is and trying to institute it in other areas where it's not to the point where we're going to take a child from a home, but let's fix what's going on in that child's world.
Well, let me mention that one of the things about restorative is that there's a common language, a very simple tribal circle. Don't use you statements, use I statements. Very simple common language, which in my lousy Spanish, I could teach to parents. And that common language then can cross sectors. And the gold standard for me is when kids are actually using it among one another. But once that common language is in place, the cross-sector, cross-family, cross-school works a lot better, a lot more smoothly. And now we're solving our conflict with one another at a lower level.
Yep, makes sense.
So when you think about it, we who live in Rhode Island, we've heard kids get into trouble. Sometimes they get sent to the Rhode Island, the training school, not with a glorious or outstanding record by any stretch. Not equipped for whatever reasons. We'll save that for another day. So can you tell us any kind of metrics or any kind of results that you've had from your groups or the schools that you've been in? What kinds of success stories or measurements might there be?
Boy, it's in pockets. I mean, the kinds of data that we were hoping for. My line is that we're the pink elephant because schools, they call it the cells and bells, are so tightly wound with time and 2.3 seconds of passing and all that. So we show up and say, you know, give us the kid and we'll work with the family. They can hardly, I mean, over time, they've gotten a lot better. So our successes are things like kid sees herself in relationship to her community and just stops it. So it's still at relatively individual levels. We have a couple of schools who are starting to really take it on. We have one Providence school that's trained up a lot of teachers. And what their issue now is, we want to work with one another and as adults. And there's just no time, so we're kind of working on stuff like that. So you ask about successes, and I wish I could give you clean, clear data. We have reduced suspensions in a couple of those schools. We have reduced fighting because there's another recourse. That's the main thing you want to do, is bring the heat down in a lot of these places. There's a Connecticut juvenile facility which has been circling up for 2 years and has greatly reduced staff absenteeism, injury, new charges, etc., because everybody's talking to each other. They're all doing this circling up thing. So those are the kinds of things that I would love to do.
Touch on, if you will, the idea that even if a child has been out of the home or in another facility and then has to go back into a school and community setting, you help with transitions of sorts, and how does that process work?
Well, transition is something, again, that's used internationally and used a lot. In some cases, I just went to a conference up in Halifax. If you're coming out of somewhere, you always have a conference facilitator because they want to make sure that you're not back. We are setting up a pilot program right now with the Sargent Center, which is a special needs center down in East Greenwich. Where, you know, there will be a step down. Instead of going directly into a school that has no idea what to do with them, there will be a step down. So a conference facilitator will get the case in the beginning, conference it, you know, pull everybody together, mom and everybody else, step down program while you work at the school about how you're going to receive this kid. Everybody else is working with so that you don't go back. Our recidivism rate in all of our stuff, you know, is very high. It's high.
I had read that there's a federal advisory committee on juvenile justice. It presented as recently as May 2017 the results of a state-by-state survey of juvenile justice initiatives in various states. Interestingly enough, there's no such participation in Rhode Island, but Massachusetts does. There are 34 states that did participate. It's kind of interesting that there are programs in place that yet this is not part of what is considered to be a workable system. There's an advisory group that's reporting on it, and yet there's no data about any kind of initiatives that are taking place. So at the criminal level, if there are kids who are in the system, what else happens to them once they're in the system and then graduate or time out of the system? What happens then, David?
Well, in terms of children who go through the family court and are now either admitting to an offense or convicted of doing the offense, the goal, like I said, is rehabilitation. But there's very limited resources through the family court. You know, they'll send him through a program through the training school, or DCYF, which runs the training school, might have a program. They send them to these outsourced programs, and it's really hard to tell. I think you're right. I think it's sort of like the judge's explanation of the drug court, where they send some child out for treatment, but then they put them back to where they were. So they will do what they can with the child, but I think what happens is, as you say, it's not just the child, it's the whole community, the context, the family, and all of that. So I don't think it's as successful in rehabilitating a child through our juvenile system as it would be if we were able to bring all of those constituencies together.
So there's a mindset, and this is no offense to you, of rehabilitation, as though we can fix a kid, as though the kid were mechanical. Right. And in the restorative world, there's the kid in the center, the immediate family, and then there's the context. And you have to look at all of it in order that behavior actually change. Because, yeah, the kid just comes. So restoration is the context as a whole.
And so, it's no offense taken, because I agree with you. I know the goal is rehabilitation. I don't think it works without the restoration.
Well, and the other language which makes me crazy is corrections. Ooh. That one just, we're going to correct. Ouch.
Yeah, and in the adult world, it is the Department of Corrections, but it's really not designed to correct. It's designed theoretically to punish.
Right.
And so you would hope part of what happens is part of the punishment results in a correction, but That's a whole nother world.
Restoration has consequences, but not punishment. Punishment is external control, and if you're doing that, you're going to have to keep doing that.
Right.
And restoration is you've got to get the adult or kid on their own, under their own steam, doing
Right.
community appropriate behavior.
So in the short amount of time that we have left, in the system that is our system, using the language that we're familiar with, even though this, what Julie is saying is very helpful, at what point do we in our system have the ability to watch over things that could be improving over a continuum? For example, if a child is sent to correctional, the training school, is there, or isn't, there's probation. Is there someone minding the store to see what happens along the continuum who could plug in and intercept something that is going on, the kids hanging out with the wrong children? Is there anything in the legal system that lets that happen?
There is, but it's, as you say, more watching than fixing. You know, a probation officer has a boatload of cases, and children come in and they talk, and are you going to your counselor? Are you doing this? Are you doing that? Yep. All they can really do is check off the box that they're doing what they've been asked to do. They don't really have the ability with their caseload to dig in and really say, all right, and what's going on at home, and how can we fix this, and let's bring your parents in and talk, let's talk about what's going on at school. They look at it, they have time to check off the box to make sure you're following the requirements of your probation, but it's not, the probation office and the probation officers don't have the time to really dig in as the restoration group might be able to do. But the answer is yes, there is a program, there is a process to follow those things and to direct people in the right direction.
And Julia, with your program, is it a conference, a session? It's not a one and done. We have little time left, but is there a follow-along with your programs too?
Absolutely. So you pre-conference, you talk to everybody, and you give them the rules. You can't use this time to go dump on the kid. And in that, you find out a bunch of stuff. Not everything goes to conference. Not everything is publicly. It's like, oh, you know, this is not the kid. Then you have a structured conversation, which is the meeting itself. And we give that out to everybody. This is what's going to go down. These are the questions getting asked. And then the conference facilitator, yes, follows up what's going to happen next. And this happens internationally in special education courses, in all kinds of stuff, in legal situations where, okay, kid, you agreed to do this, that, and the other thing as a result of what you did. You need to do it, or there are other consequences.
Sounds like there really is much to follow up on, and we thank you for bringing
my pleasure
so many of these issues to the table and introducing us to the program, and I understand that
Thank you for inviting me.
Hope you'll come back again. David, thank you. We hope that you'll continue to watch The Law Matters because, as we say, it matters to you.